I let that wingtip bow dry out for a few days. Then I took it off, took it outside, and took a block plane and a belt sander and trimmed that trailing edge area off down to the 5/8 inch width that it needs to be to fit into the trailing edge of that wingtips. Well, I got a aviation drill bit so I can reach in from the back and back drill a hole for that tip rib, and I'll go ahead and drill it out and then countersink it and put a screw in it. The ribs call for a 3/4 inch number 6 flathead machine screw, lock washer, and a nut on the back side. I put a 3/4 inch stainless steel flathead screw in there and then used a fiber lock washer on the back side instead. I used my angle drill attachment to back drill one of the brackets on the front spar and one of the brackets on the rear spar, but I wasn't able to get it into the other two brackets, so I had to just shoot those in with the guess from the front, and I waited to do those until after I was ready to mount the wingtip bow permanently. I countersunk those two holes and then installed a 3/4 inch number 8 machine screw with a lock nut on the back side. I was able to back drill the wingtip rib trailing edge attach point, but the aileron rib trailing edge, I had to drill that from the front with just a wild ass guess. Both of those holes were countersunk, and then we put number 6 flathead machine screws in there with lock nuts on the back side. The wingtip bow has been notched so it fits into the pocket into that outboard aileron rib the way it's supposed to. Screwed down to that nose rib and to the outboard aileron rib on the nose, and then I've got one screw each in the forward and rear spar in one of the brackets there, and it's screwed into the trailing edge of the outboard rib and the outboard aileron rib. I'm going to go ahead and wrap some string around the end of that wingtip bow and wrap it around the spar to help take some of the spring off of it while it sits there and dries out some more. It's been several days now since I steam bent that piece of white oak for a wingtip bow. I've had it sitting here on the airplane since then while I was doing other things. I finally got my taxes done, so now I can get back to work on the airplane. Well, I came up here last night and I took the bow off of the wingtip. I took the screws off of it and everything and set it up, and it's holding its shape really well. It's got a little spring to it, but it'll bend right back into shape. Well, I just spent a little bit of time going over it with some sandpaper, and I gotta say I'm falling in love with this white oak. I've never worked with it before. I've seen it around a lot, handrails and stairs and things like that in some high-end buildings, some government buildings and some business buildings and stuff, and chairs, the old business chairs and stuff like that. But I've never had a chance to work with it. I've worked with red oak before, and that's a kind of a whole different cat. And most of the stuff I've ever worked with has all been softwoods. Doug fir, hemlock, larch, of course pines and cedars. But I've always been kind of envious of these guys with these sawmills back in the eastern parts of the United States. They've got all this variety of wood that they mill and work with all the time, and we don't have that here. Northern Idaho, where I grew up, it was mostly what you'd call softwoods. We called Doug fir or red fir and tamarack hardwoods, and then of course pines and spruces and cedar softwoods. And of course here in Alaska, the only thing I have to work with is spruce and hemlock and yellow cedar and a little bit of red cedar. So anyway, I've been having fun. I'm enjoying this white oak here. I'd like to have a whole bunch more of it to work with, to use. I'd like to put some of it in the house when I finish building the house. I think stair treads would be neat, and maybe some other stuff. Anyway, this is what I've got, and that bow sitting there. I need to work on it and get it put on so we can finish the rest of the wing. So Anyway, I just sat here for about a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, with some sandpaper and going over it and knocking down the sharp edges and the fuzzies and stuff on it, and some of the saw marks that were on the back. Using some 80 grit sandpaper, and 80 grit sandpaper, if I was using it on any of the wood I normally use, you'd have big gouges in there that take you days to sand out. But this stuff, the 80 grit, actually leaves a pretty nice finish on there. Well, I just went over it with air gun and blew all the sawdust off, and then went over it again with some Prep-Sol, and we're getting ready to coat it with some epoxy varnish. And this is what I got here. It's a polyfiber product, and it's an epoxy varnish, a 2-part varnish. You mix it 2 parts of the varnish with 1 part of catalyst, and then let it set for 30 minutes to cook off. And actually they say to use a little longer in a high humidity situation, up to an hour or so. And then you can thin it 2 parts of the mixed epoxy with 1 part of reducer. And that stuff is tough. That's about the only thing you can use on the wood when you're using the Polytack, things like that on there to glue the fabric on. And this stuff is so tough, they tell you that if you spray it on, to clean up your spray guns right away, because after this stuff sets up, MEK won't touch it. So I mixed it up before I started sanding this oak down, so I can put some reducer in there now and thin it out. And I think I'm going to thin it a little thinner than what they recommend, so that it penetrates into the wood deep on the first coat and gets penetrated down in the wood real good. And then I'll coat it 3 or 4 times, and then they say to let it sit for at least 7 days before you finish it. Once it sets up to where I can handle it, I can put this thing together. It's going to be several days before I get ready to put the cover on it. That'll be enough time for it to cure then, because once I get this on, screwed down to the wingtip, then I can start putting my wingtip leading edge covers on, and that's going to take, well, I don't know, a day or so to do that, I suppose. And then I've got my mechanic called the other day to find out how my timing was going to be to get an annual done, and I told him what was going on and asked him if he wanted to come up for a day to inspect this wing before I start putting the cover on it. And he's going to call me back. He's got a friend that's going to fly up to Anchorage, and they might be willing to stop in here for an hour or so to come and inspect this wing before I start putting the fabric on it. So that'll be good. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm going to wait for that acrylic to flash off real good out of the wood. I got to figure out what I'm going to do for that thing. To varnish it, it's so big and awkward, it's hard to find a place to set that. And it's cold outside. I don't really want to set it outside to do it. Sun was out yesterday, and if I set it out on that platform that I used to make up my steam bending, that would have been a good spot for it. But now it's blowing and snowing and raining and crappy out there and cold. So that's not as good a spot for it as I'd like. I guess I could hang it up. I've got nails in big timber overhead, and I can maybe put some string in there and hang it up from that. I guess I better get that done. The first coat of the varnish has been applied to the wingtip bow. We got to wait for that to set up before we apply any more coats. The instructions say 3 to 4 hours between coats, so it's only 60 degrees in here, so we'll probably go for the longer. Let's see, 4 hours would make it about 9 o'clock tonight. Well, I can come in then and put another coat on it. The Polyfiber instruction manual recommends you use a pencil for laying out lines and not use a magic marker or pen. And a perfect example of that on this wingtip bow, I used a magic marker on there to fill in the space on that where it's tapered. The wingtip bow gets tapered down to 5/8 of an inch wide from an inch wide as it comes to the trailing edge. And I laid that out and filled that in, the part that I wanted to leave, with a magic marker so that I could plane that down to the lines and know where they were, and when it started getting dark then I could just quit planing and sanding. Well, as soon as I touched that area that had the magic marker in it with that varnish, that even though it's been over a week since I put that on there, it dissolved it right away and spread it out through the varnish. Now, it's not going to hurt anything on this because this isn't meant to be exposed or anything, but if that was on a wing or something under the fabric and got picked up when you put the polytack on it or some of the other stuff with the solvents in it, and it got smeared into the fabric, it'd make an ugly mess. Probably be okay because it'd probably be covered up with the overlying coatings and stuff, but it would make a mess to start with. So anyway, it's a good reason why you use pencil lines and not magic marker or ink lines on there. I've got 4 coats of varnish on that wingtip bow now. I just put the last coat, and that's all I'm going to put on it. I just put the last coat on it here now. Well, I got to let it sit overnight, I suppose, at least, to get it cure before I start putting it on the wing. Well, it's hanging there, and it's almost too pretty to cover up under in that wing on the wingtip. It's almost too bad that it's not exposed. It's like a nice fine piece of furniture. Now, paint supplies can be kind of hard to come by in this country. There's just not enough people that do it to have any supply on hand in any of the stores. At least not the kind of paint supplies that I use. Some of the painting I do is just touch up, and it uses small cups. I've been using these little, I think they're pint cups, for quite a while as my smallest mixing cups, and they're graduated here so you can use graduations for a lot of the mixing. Some of the mixing, it doesn't work very good. Some of the paint, the polyurethane paint, has 2 or 3 parts in it, and anyway, they don't have the mixing ratios on that cup, but it works for most things. But that's a little bit big for some of the stuff, so I ordered a bunch of these little half pint cups. I think they're half pint, 8 fluid ounces. So anyway, I ordered a bunch of those, and those got graduations on them too, but they're just basic graduation in ounces on one side and milliliters on the other side. But they work for mixing small batches and stuff. And that's what I mixed the last batch of the polyfiber primer paint that I mixed up in, and I just had a little bit that I needed for the wingtip leading edge cover after I fixed it up. So I used one of these little cups for that, and then I mixed up the varnish in one of these for the wingtip bow. Well, even though it's a small cup, and I only put 2 ounces in of the varnish, and then that takes an ounce of the catalyst, and then you got 3 ounces, and then so that takes an ounce and a half of reducer, and I put a little bit more reducer in it than that to thin it down to penetrate the wood. Anyway, that was more than enough, so I had extra of the green primer left over, and I had plenty of this left over. I'm not quite done with the varnish yet, and that stuff only has a pot life of a few hours. But what I do to extend the pot life on this is I make some aluminum foil and cover those up and then stick them in the refrigerator, and that slows down the reaction time of the paint and keeps it going longer. And if I really need to extend it out a while, I'll stick it in the freezer. So I just did that. I had some of this green primer, and there was a few spots that I wanted to put on to kind of touch up just with the brush, and I just took it out of the refrigerator and let it warm up for a few hours, and then touched up some spots on the wing there. It's thickened up, of course, but it's still viable, and it's the same with the varnish. I've got it in the refrigerator. I went ahead and stuck the primer paint in the freezer now because I don't know if or when I'll need any of it, and so we'll keep it active, keep it from going bad as long as possible. So I stuck it in the freezer, but the varnish I just stuck in the refrigerator again. I'm going to let this wingtip bow dry overnight, and then we'll put it on the wing, and then I've got some trim work to do on it after I put it on the wing to trim it up to length and stuff. So the ends I want to varnish, and I might need to touch up something with the varnish on it. So I want to keep the varnish viable as long as possible. I've just about worked myself out of a job now. I don't really have anything else to do until that wingtip bow goes on there now, but I did figure out one more thing that I want to do here. I've got this Roper Whitney XX punch, and I just put in, I think it said it was a 283 thousandths punch in there. I don't know what size that translates into, but it's pretty close to, yeah, it's a little over 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to take that punch, and it might be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to punch some holes in my false spars on the bottoms of them. Now the wing is upside down, So this is the bottom of the wing here, and if you look at the false bar, the bottom of the false bar, it's got a lip on it that's bent up. Right now it's bent down, but when the wing's turned over the right way, it's bent up. So theoretically, any condensation of moisture, anything that would build up in the wing and drop down to the lower skin on the wing would run down and hit this lip, and then maybe go down underneath it right here or get sealed in the fabric or something there. But it also can go get condensation and build up on top of this wing, and with this lip bent up like that, then that condensation and moisture that gets built up on top of here has nowhere to go. It's got to build up enough to get over that lip. Well, this airplane, of course, is in a wet environment, very wet environment, and of course a lot of condensation, a lot of moisture in the air and whatnot, flies in the rain, and it's out in the weather most of the season, or a lot of the season, in the rain. So it's going to be prone to be building up moisture inside the wing. Well, it also sits tail down with the nose up in the air quite a bit, so the moisture is going to run down there, but anything that's going to run down in here is going to get stuck in there. So I'm going to take that punch and punch a few holes in this in spots, so any water that gets up here on this false bar was going to be draining out. Would take the wing anyway and put seaplane grommets in here. You punch holes in the wing anyway for drain holes, but since this is a seaplane, we'll put seaplane grommets on here, and they have a little cup that sticks up and it's open in the back, so when you're flying it creates a little vortex there and sucks water out of it and allows it to dry out a little bit. So I'm going to punch holes in this, and then I'm going to put seaplane grommets on it and stuff anyway, so we'll see how that goes. Well, I've got 4 coats of varnish on this wingtip bow, and it looks pretty good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and it's still tacky. It's still not completely dried. Oh, well, it's not sticky. I'm going to go ahead and put it on here. All right. Now that's all the way around, but we basically start from this end and work that way. Let me get a clamp here and clamp that on. All right, and that should help. This first screw is a number 6. Okay, and the next one is a number 6 also. I'm not putting the nuts on yet. I'm just putting the screws through the holes. All right, the next one is a number 8. Boy, this oak is sure a lot nicer to work with than the softwoods I'm used to with tightening screws up and stuff like that. Okay, now one of these, I'll have to look. I think it's this one here. This one here has a strut that comes out to it to meet it. Okay, so that one goes into the spar. So I need a little number 4 screw for the spar. I'm going to leave that screw just a little bit loose until I get this other screw in there, and that takes a number 6. So now I can tighten up this screw that goes into the spar. And I can't put a wrench on this nut. Let me get that bigger screwdriver. What did I do with that? There it is. Can't put a wrench on that nut because it's inside the ears on this strut where it attaches, but that also encapsulates that nut and keeps it from turning, hopefully. There, that tightened up good. Now we got one more screw to put in on this aileron, outboard aileron rib, and that's a number 6. Now I've got one strut on here. There's another strut that ties into the end of this outboard aileron rib and comes up here, and then there are 4 of them that go across this way, actually this way to this way. So, well, that heavy flannel shirt was just right for working outside, but a little bit too warm for in here. So I've got wires for the nav light. I've got a ground wire and a positive wire, and those are going to come out right here, and a ground wire is going to attach to the wing spar right in here. So I've got to put a fitting on there and clean off the paint off of that inside of that spar to hook that up to, and those come out, but I don't want those sticking out when I cover the plane up, so I'm going to have to figure out some way of I'll get some real thin safety wire or something and put on those so that I can fish them out, or put them in here, maybe in there like that or something, so I can fish them out after I get the fabric on and get that all done. The next thing put on there is these struts here, and they attach to the spar down here and then out here to the wingtip bow, and there's 2 of them on each side. One comes off the rear spar here, or 2 come off the rear spar here, one at the top of the rear spar, one at the bottom of the rear spar, and same with the front spar. So those screw into the spars with these Z screws, and then into the bow with a PK screw. Okay, that thing is on there. Now I get to cut this wingtip bow off on the inboard side of this aileron rib on both the front, the leading edge, and the back. Got a new tool here, one I've never used before. I bought this for my wife a year ago for Christmas on sale. Anyway, like I said, I've never used it before. Like a little saw kind of thingy. I don't know, I've seen people use those, but this is the first time for me. So we'll get this. Okay, that worked pretty good. Get over there on the other side. Alright, well that made quick work of that. This thing fit right flush up against that rib and cut that thing off just as smooth as you could imagine. I'm going to get a little bit of sandpaper here and just touch that up just a little bit. Really don't need anything on this side. Alright, now I'm going to take some of this varnish and coat the cut off ends of that. And I might just take a little bit and dribble down in between where they're around where these, actually they're pretty tight, they're pretty good. I think they're pretty good. I'm going to make sure that's, I tightened that screw up. I don't remember whether I did or not. Yeah, that one's tight. Yeah, that one's tight. Okay, those are tight. The eyes that I've got here, the terminal ends that I've got here are too big. The hole in them is too big a diameter for what I want to do here. So I've got some smaller ones down in the hangar. I'll go get those to do that ground with. This is the ring shank terminal that was in that little kit that I've got up here. And the eye on this is just too big for what I need for here for the ground screw for that nav light. I like using these. They've got this shrink tubing on here. You can shrink down, and it actually has glue in it that glues itself to the wire. but this is just a standard ring shank terminal here like this. And these, just the type of crimper tool that you can use on those, is just a cheap crimper tool, and it's got wire strippers on it, and then the crimpers for the non-insulated terminals and the crimpers for the insulated terminals, and then it's got some things here for shearing off screws, little bolts, and these actually work pretty good. I've used that quite a bit. So this is the AMP ring shank terminal. These are a little bit more expensive one. You can see it's got a smaller, well, there's the two of them connect together. It's got a smaller eye in it. It's should be just about right for these screws here going into the wing spar. And these are hard plastic, and they're better quality terminal. They've got the metal here for the ring, for the crimp, goes all the way down. It's a lot longer. Then it has another bulb section there that crimps down on the wire. And it takes a specialty tool for these. This is the tool for it. It's a ratcheting tool. And then these terminals fit in here. And like I said, on one side is a smaller crimp for the wire crimp, and then you have another crimp. This is for the conductor crimp, and then this is for the wire outer shell of the wire crimp here on this. Like I said, these are basically aviation approved, aircraft approved, and I use those throughout the airplane when I built the fuselage. But I like these, as I said, I like these like this with the heat shrink on them, because they shrink down and seal up the connector and everything. And a lot of times what happens is you get moisture going in through here, but this also provides a strain relief on the wire. But these are definitely better quality connectors. Now, I don't really need one with an insulator on it for this ground wire, but that's what I've got. I don't think I have any uninsulated connectors for that. I'll go ahead and do this ground wire now. Oh, there's the screw head. Here's the screw head of the B or Z type screw that goes into the wing spar. And you can see that one will clamp down on this terminal here. Where on this one, it didn't leave much bearing surface on that for clamping down. I'm going to do one more thing on this wingtip bow. Now, where it attaches to the trailing edge of this aileron rib, it's got two ears that stick out past here. They had holes in them, and you're supposed to put a couple of nails in there to hold that down. Those things have been abused over the years, and they are broken off. So I'm going to take a piece of aluminum here and make a little bracket to go over the back side of this and to screw down onto this rib right here to help hold that in there.